Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going on a little journey, into this fascinating world of language, specifically how sentences are built. Ever wonder how we make sense of words just strung together?
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. We've got a real treat for you today. We're diving into Noam Chomsky's Syntactic Structures. This book, published way back in 1957, completely shook up the field of linguistics.
It is incredible to think about the impact syntactic structures had. Imagine you're studying language and suddenly this book comes along. It just completely upends everything you thought you knew about the field. It was like a mind explosion for linguists.
A mind explosion. I like that. So tell me, what was so groundbreaking about Chomsky's approach?
Well, before syntactic structures, linguists mainly focused on describing language as it appeared on the surface. The words themselves, their sounds, the order they came in. But Chomsky said, hold on, there's something deeper going on here. He was convinced that there was a hidden machinery, a kind of blueprint, behind how we construct sentences.
Okay, so we're not just talking about grammar rules here. We're going deeper.
Exactly. It's like Chomsky was saying, let's look under the hood. He wanted to understand the system that allows us to create and understand an infinite number of sentences using a limited set of words.
It is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. We can say and understand things that we've never even heard before. But hold on. How did Chomsky even begin to explain this hidden structure?
Well, he started by pointing out that you can have a sentence that's grammatically correct, but completely nonsensical.
Like what? Give me an example.
Chomsky's famous example is, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Grammatically, it's perfect. Subject, verb, adjectives, all the pieces are there. But does it make any sense? Not really.
That's hilarious. It's like following a recipe, but swapping out all the ingredients.
Yeah.
You might technically be following the steps, but you're not going to end up with what you expected.
Exactly. And that was Chomsky's point. If we only focus on the words themselves, the surface of language, we miss the underlying grammar. That truly gives a sentence meaning.
Okay, so how do we get to that underlying grammar?
Well, Chomsky proposed this idea of a theoretical machine that could generate all the grammatically correct sentences of a language. Imagine a linguistic factory churning out perfect phrases.
So it's like there's a program running in our brains, making sure our sentences come out right.
You could think of it that way. This machine would use a system of rules, almost like a computer program, to ensure that the output, the sentences, were always grammatically sound. Chomsky explored this using finite state models.
Whoa. Finite state models? That sounds pretty technical.
They are, but they're not as complicated as they sound. Think of them like those flowcharts you might have seen in computer science or engineering. They show how a sentence unfolds step by step, kind of like a map guiding you through the possible word combinations.
So instead of just looking at the likelihood of words appearing together, Chomsky was saying there's an actual process, a set of rules, that determines how sentences are structured.
Precisely. And this challenged previous linguistic models that relied heavily on statistics. Chomsky argued that just because words appear together frequently doesn't necessarily mean they're grammatically connected in a meaningful way.
So even if you analyze millions of sentences and see patterns, you're still only scratching the surface.
Right. We can understand and create sentences we've never encountered before. Language isn't just about memorization or probability. There is an inherent system at work. And that's what Chomsky wanted to uncover.
Okay. So we have this theoretical machine, this set of rules, but I have a feeling there's more to the story.
Right.
I mean, language is so complex.
You're absolutely right. Chomsky realized that simply breaking down a sentence into parts, like noun phrases and verb phrases, wasn't enough to explain the full range of what we can do with language.
There had to be another layer, so what was it?
He introduced something called transformational grammar, essentially. He argued that sentences that look completely different on the surface can share the same underlying structure and vice versa.
Hold on, can you give me an example of that? I'm trying to picture this in my mind.
Think about it this way. You can rearrange the furniture in a room, but the room itself stays the same. That's kind of like what we do with sentences. We can change the word order, like making a statement into a question. But the underlying meaning, the deep structure, remains.
Wow. That's actually a great analogy. So are these transformations something we do consciously? Like, do we think, okay, I'm going to transform this sentence now?
Not at all. They happen naturally and effortlessly. It's part of the magic of language. And Chomsky goes into specific examples of these transformations in the book, if you're interested in seeing how they work.
This is where it gets really exciting. We're diving into the deep structure, which, hey, is kind of our thing.
Right.
But what exactly does that mean? I'm ready to go even deeper.
Well, imagine you have two sentences that look completely different on the surface,
Yeah.
like the cat chased the mouse and the mouse was chased by the cat.
Active versus passive voice. My old English teacher drilled that into us.
Exactly. They seem different.
Right.
But at their core, they're conveying the same basic information. A cat chasing a mouse. That shared meaning is what Chomsky called the deep structure, the underlying idea that gets transformed into different surface forms.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this works. But why is this deep structure idea so important? What does it tell us about language? Or even about ourselves?
That's where things get really interesting. Understanding this deep structure is crucial for understanding how we, as humans, process and generate language. It's about how we make sense of the world around us.
You're saying it's not just about grammar rules, it's about how our brains work.
Exactly. Chomsky's work wasn't just about analyzing sentences. It was a window into the human mind. His ideas had ripple effects across fields like cognitive science, artificial intelligence, even philosophy.
Hold on. We're going from sentences to philosophy? That's a pretty big leap.
It might seem that way. But think about it. Chomsky argued that the structure of language is innate, meaning we're born with a predisposition for language acquisition. We don't simply learn language through imitation or reward. Our brains are wired for it.
It's like we come preloaded with a language operating system. That's fascinating.
Right. And by studying the structure of language, we can learn about the mental processes, the machinery. That makes language possible.
So Chomsky's basically saying that grammar isn't just some arbitrary set of rules we learn in school. It's a fundamental part of what makes us human.
Exactly. It's a remarkable ability that we often take for granted. Think about it. You effortlessly switch between formal and informal language, understand sarcasm and humor, and even invent new words and phrases.
You're right. We do that all the time. I never thought about it that way. It's like we're all little language wizards running around.
In a way, we are. And all of that is possible because of those underlying grammatical structures Chomsky helped us understand. They're not just rules. They're your tools for linguistic creativity.
This is blowing my mind. So if language is so deeply ingrained in us, does that mean there's some sort of universal grammar underlying all human languages?
And that's a question that has fueled countless debates and research projects. It's one of the big mysteries that Chomsky's work brought to light. If there is a universal grammar, what are its core principles? How does it manifest itself in the incredible diversity of languages we see across the globe?
Those are some big questions. But before we go down that rabbit hole, I do want to acknowledge that Chomsky's ideas weren't without their critics. I mean, this guy basically turned the linguistics world upside down.
Oh, absolutely. His work was controversial. Some linguists felt his theories were too abstract, too focused on an idealized version of language, rather than the messy way people actually speak.
Like those perfectly organized kitchens you see in magazines
Yeah.
versus the reality of,
Garlic.
dirty dishes and spice jars everywhere.
Exactly. But despite the criticisms, Chomsky's core ideas about the generative nature of language and this possibility of a universal grammar have had a massive impact.
So even with the debate, there's no denying that Chomsky's work opened up a whole new way of thinking about language.
Absolutely. It sparked a revolution in the field, inspiring a generation of linguists to explore these ideas further.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from surface structure to deep structure, talked about transformational grammar, and even touched on the idea of a universal grammar. But what does all this mean for us, for the average person who maybe doesn't spend their days analyzing sentences?
That's a great question. I think one of the key takeaways is that language is far more complex and nuanced than we often realize. It's not just about stringing words together. It's about tapping into a deeply ingrained system of thought and expression.
You're saying there's more going on beneath the surface than we might think.
Exactly. Chomsky's work reminds us that even the simplest sentences are built upon a sophisticated foundation of grammatical structures. And understanding those structures gives us a greater appreciation for the power and creativity of human language.
It makes you think about all the amazing things we can do with language, from writing poetry to debating complex ideas to simply having a conversation with a friend.
Absolutely. And it makes you realize that this seemingly effortless act of communication is actually a remarkable feat of cognitive processing.
You know, I have to admit, before this deep dive, I thought grammar was just a bunch of rules to memorize. But now I see it as something so much bigger, so much more integral to who we are as humans.
That's the beauty of exploring these ideas. It challenges our assumptions and expands our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So what you're saying is, We shouldn't be afraid to geek out about grammar a little.
Absolutely. It's a gateway to understanding some truly profound aspects of the human mind.
Before we wrap up our deep dive into syntactic structures, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the idea that studying language can reveal insights into the human mind. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Well, Chomsky believed that studying the structure of language could unlock some of the mysteries of human cognition. He saw language as a window into how we think, how we categorize information, how we form relationships between concepts.
So it's not just about how we say things, but about how we think about things.
Exactly. Chomsky argued that the way our minds are structured is reflected in the way we structure our language. For example, the fact that all human languages have nouns and verbs suggests that our brains are wired to distinguish between objects and actions in the world around us.
That's fascinating. So by understanding the building blocks of language, we can start to understand the building blocks of thought.
In a way, yes. By analyzing the patterns and structures of language, we can gain insights into the cognitive processes that underlie our ability to think, reason, and communicate.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it. We're not just decoding sentences, we're decoding the human mind.
It's a truly remarkable field of study, and Chomsky's work really paved the way for this interdisciplinary approach, connecting linguistics with psychology, cognitive science, and even computer science.
Okay. We've explored the deep structure of language, the idea of transformational grammar, and even touched on the possibility of a universal grammar. But Chomsky's book, Syntactic Structures, was published back in 1957. What's been happening in the field since then?
That's a great question. Syntactic Structures was a landmark achievement, no doubt. But it was really just the beginning. Chomsky's ideas sparked a wave of research, and the field of linguistics has continued to evolve in fascinating ways.
So Chomsky threw this intellectual grenade into the world of linguistics, and then everyone started picking up the pieces and trying to figure out what it all meant.
That's a great way to put it. His work spurred new theories, new models of language, and even new subfields within linguistics. Some researchers have built upon Chomsky's ideas, while others have challenged them, proposing alternative explanations for the structure of language.
So even though Syntactic Structures is over 60 years old, it's still relevant today.
Absolutely. It's considered a foundational text, a classic that every student of linguistics should engage with. Even if you don't agree with everything Chomsky proposed, the book forces you to think critically about the nature of language. It makes you question assumptions and pushes you to consider new perspectives.
It's like the gift that keeps on giving to the field of linguistics. So for our listeners who might be inspired to dig deeper into these ideas, where would you recommend they start?
Well, of course, I highly recommend reading Syntactic Structures itself, even though it was written a while back. Chomsky's writing is surprisingly accessible, and there are tons of resources available online, like articles, videos, and even podcasts that delve into these topics in more depth.
That's a great point. There's so many ways to keep exploring this stuff. I'm even more excited about language now than I was before we started this deep dive.
That's what we love to hear. It's such a fascinating field, and there's always something new to discover. Who knows? Maybe one of our listeners will make the next groundbreaking discovery in linguistics.
Now, that would be amazing. We'll have to have them back on the show to share their findings.
Absolutely. We're always open to diving into new ideas and perspectives.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. From surface structure to deep structure, transformational grammar, the possibility of a universal grammar, and even the evolution of linguistics as a field. It's been quite a journey.
It has been. And I think we've barely scratched the surface. There's still so much to learn and explore about language.
I agree. It's a field that constantly challenges us to think differently, to see the world in new ways. So as we wrap up this deep dive into syntactic structures, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. We've talked a lot about the rules and structures that govern language, but I think it's important to remember that language is also a tool for creativity, for expression, for connecting with others.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Language is a gift. It allows us to share our thoughts and feelings, to build relationships, to create art, and to shape the world around us.
Exactly. So yes, pay attention to grammar, explore the fascinating structures that Chomsky revealed, but don't be afraid to play with language, to experiment, to have fun with it. It's yours to explore.
Well said. Keep questioning, keep exploring, keep diving deep. The mysteries of language are waiting to be unlocked, and each new discovery brings us closer to understanding ourselves and our place in the universe.
That's it for this deep dive into the fascinating world of syntactic structures. We hope you've enjoyed the journey, and that you've come away with a newfound appreciation for the power and beauty of language. Until next time, keep those linguistic gears turning.